So in the last lesson, we were talking about how science fiction in 1966 through the novel Make Room, Make Room uh, discusses the idea of overpopulation and resource scarcity. So I asked you to reflect on this. How does the world of today deal with resource scarcity? So when pesticides are used on a mass scale on crops, the reason given is that with the booming human population, uh, simple measures, natural measures, going organic would not help. So I invite you to reflect on this and think about it, that is it really impossible to grow organic crops and feed the entire human population? Is it so important that we must use chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides, where we poison our own drinking systems, our own survival is poisoned? So these ideas come up when we read science fiction which talks about these climate issues. From 1980s to 1990s, climate change finally entered the narrative, and it got a push from environmentalists around the globe. And there were many government policies formed in the US itself, banning the use of pesticides, etc. So by the 1980s, scientists began to understand more about climate change and the greenhouse effect. This scientific knowledge gradually influenced science fiction, with writers imagining futures where rising temperatures, sea levels, and extreme weather events transform life on Earth. So, gradually, when these imagined futures started coming up in science fiction, about after all the knowledge coming from scientists about rising sea levels and their outcomes and the extreme weather events and the causes, uh, then after this was followed by resolutions also. Never before have fiction and science fiction talked so much about um, renewable energy resources. So that too came up after the 80s. It became a very strong recommendation in many science fiction works. So during the 1990s, there was an emergence of climate fiction on its own. The subgenre of climate fiction, or cli-fi, began to take shape, focusing specifically on climate change and environmental degradation. These works warned of possible futures if humanity failed to curb emissions and continued unsustainable practices. So we already know the use of petrol, the use of cars, and the use of electricity and the use of chemicals. All these things had gradually increased, and science fiction took the cue from the times and warned of possible futures if humanity failed to address them, if humanity failed to curb those carbon emissions and continued unsustainable practices, then the human race would not be able to survive. So these ideas are found in Kim Stanley Robinson's Mars Trilogy 1990 and Bruce Sterling's Heavy Weather 1994, which explore how climate change might shape future societies and ecosystems. So we can see a change from the first and the early science fiction novels, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. What was the content in that? The content was uh, experimentation with nature, and what was the result eventually was that human beings could play with nature or try to influence nature in a limited manner. They were not perfect masters, they could not master nature completely. But the later science fiction, which, for example, coming in the 1990s, It was talking about altered futures and altered ecosystems, and how, what to expect from it, what would be the consequences for human beings, what will be the consequences for the human race. Post apocalyptic worlds. Many science fiction stories during this time envision post apocalyptic worlds where humanity has failed to mitigate climate change. So, here we mention once more Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, 1993. It depicts droughts, resource wars, and societal collapse, reflecting anxieties about what might happen if climate change remains unaddressed. So, if one sees the movies made during this period and reflecting these ideas on resource wars and societal collapse, the picture is pretty grim, and it is enough to make people sit up and take note. And they certainly would not want such worlds to exist. They certainly would not want such futures to come into reality. So, in this way, science fiction is able to influence us and force us to reflect and think and take action. 21st century climate fiction and the mainstream. Science fiction becomes climate fiction. With the onset of the 21st century, climate change became a more immediate reality, influencing both science fiction literature and popular culture. So we can see this in the movies also. The latest and the most current movies are about science fiction. In Hindi we have Kedarnath, which very accurately tells us how human beings destroy their own environment, and how human beings are moving away from the sacred self, the sacred self, the self that is one with nature, the self that respects and loves nature and adores nature, how they have moved away from that. Because in that film, Kedarnath, the people are disbelievers in any kind of sacred element or any religious building, and they go ahead and build their structures in spite of warnings, and which leads to dire consequences. So this kind of movie and this kind of idea comes again and again in 21st century science fiction literature and popular culture and movies. Climate fiction moved beyond niche audiences, appearing in mainstream books, films, and TV series. So the platforms also started proliferating, and there were now films, and there were TV series, and there were books, and there were online games, and so there are so many niches that come in for talking about science fiction and climate fiction. Works like Margaret Atwood's Mad Adam trilogy, 2003 to 2013, Cormac McCarthy's The Road, 2006 addresses ecological collapse and human resilience in extreme environments. So, when we talk about McCarthy's The Road, 2006, it is a climate altered world where people are trying to find shelter and people are trying to survive. So it's a story of a father and a son, and it has been a very successful movie too. So as the climate tensions escalate and the extreme weather events increase around the world, uh, filmmakers, science fiction writers, climate fiction writers all uh, feel compelled to deal with this looming threat. Hollywood's take on climate futures. So, The Day After Tomorrow, 2004, Interstellar, 2014. So, these are films, and Hollywood portrays climate disasters and emphasizes the urgency of taking action to prevent catastrophic outcomes. So we can see how the coming of the 21st century has sort of imbued the writing of science fiction and filled it with climate disasters, altered futures, altered universes, mass migrations from the planet Earth to other worlds. So all taken from current events, current happenings. Sometimes we read and we hear about future scenarios where when the planet is in ruins, there will be other habitations, perhaps on Mars. But when these discussions are there, when these issues are mentioned, um, there is no talk about the poorer sections of society. They will have to live on a globally warmed earth, suffering inequality, suffering the depletion of essential resources. And then deep ecology forces us to take note of the non-human beings. Why is it that they never come into the picture? When we think about the future of humanity, it's only the future of the humanity. But what about the future of the entire earth? That is the non-human too. And they are important in themselves, as deep ecology tells us, but they are not considered thus, and they are only considered for the sake of their usefulness. But even if we consider the non-human world for its usefulness, if we consider the non-human world for its usefulness, then how could human beings survive in an ecosystem where the non-human world has been destroyed, where biodiversity is ruined? Because the entire planet Earth, it is built on ecosystems, on interrelated, interconnected lives, and there is a network of connecting lives. So just taking note of human beings and thinking of saving human beings is simply not enough. And again, capitalist ideas talk of human beings only in terms of the rich and the privileged. What happens to the impoverished and the poor people? The rich people, the affluent, can hope to take flight on other planets, but what about the poor people? So these ideas are tackled in these science fiction films and in these climate fiction films, and the question is raised, what if this happens tomorrow? How will we tackle it? Why not tackle it right now? Why not take charge of things right now when it is possible to do something? So we talked about dystopian visions. We also talked about utopian visions of the future. So along with dystopian narratives, there has been a growth of solar punk, a subgenre that envisions positive futures where humans coexist harmoniously with nature. So there are some positive visions, and these visions are derived from those colonies of human beings, those tribes, those local tribes that have always lived in harmony with nature, and depending on their wisdom or drawing that ancient wisdom may help build a sustainable future. So solar punk stories depict societies that have successfully transitioned to renewable energy, sustainable cities, and eco-friendly technologies, offering a counter narrative to dystopian climate fiction. So again, here is a question for us, that how easy is it to switch to renewable energy? How easy is it to live in sustainable cities when the world is divided economically, divided by war and politics, and climate impact is not uniform. It is different in different countries. And what exactly are eco-friendly technologies? The very word technology is a difficult word to understand. Technology it is a machine. It runs on oil. Technology refers to the machines in industries, or the machines uh, that are created by scientists to do certain work, and how do they run, what sustains them. So in today's day and age, when we talk of AI and we talk of computing, it all runs on natural resources. So how are they going to transit to eco-friendly resources? Till now, it is not there. Till now, there are gallons of water that are being going, and so this is a hope and a dream in solar punk stories, perhaps giving some hope. But when one reflects on it deeply, then one has to realize that we depend so much on the non-human world for our needs, on natural resources for our needs, that when we are going to destroy it, if we entirely destroy it, then how do we expect to have something that is eco-friendly? So the very beings that are there, that are supportive of our life, if we destroy them and we depend entirely on technology, then how do we expect to be eco-friendly? So these are some questions which rise when we read Solar Punk, which has a very positive outlook about sustainable futures. Seems almost an impossible dream, but maybe human beings can get somewhere near them. So there are some other notable works by influential authors in the climate-centric science fiction genre. J.G. Ballard in The Drowned World, 1962, and The Burning World, 1964. Ballard imagines futures ravaged by extreme weather and environmental collapse, exploring psychological and social impacts. Ursula Le Guin has been known for her anthropological approach, and this work of hers is The Dispossessed, 1974. So as a woman writer, she is very famous as a science fiction writer, and so for women writing science fiction, we can hope to get a different perception of the universe, a perception other than the male perception of the universe. Kim Stanley Robinson, his books are New York 2140 and The Ministry for the Future. It was published in 2020 and the other one was in 2017. His novels present meticulously researched visions of climate futures and propose concrete solutions to environmental crisis. So here is one novelist who does scientific research in great detail and thus builds up visions of climate future and comes up with concrete solutions for environmental crisis or collapse. In the best-selling list, we have Paolo Bacigalupi's The Water Knife and The Wind-Up Girl. When we study science fiction and we study science fiction text, these books are very important and they are worth a read to understand the status of climate fiction and science fiction in the 21st century. These are one of the most important books. What is the cultural impact of science fiction on climate awareness? As we have already said, it raises awareness and shapes public discourse. It influences policy and innovation. Robinson's The Ministry for the Future, for example, proposes geoengineering and economic solutions, sparking conversations on climate policy. Science fiction also creates a feeling of empathy and ethics by humanizing the consequences of ecological destruction. The genre inspires readers to consider the moral responsibility of preserving the planet for future generations. So, the ecological consequences, the destruction is presented in such a manner that one can understand it and one can sort of feel the reality of it, and thus one feels the moral responsibility of preserving the planet for future generations. The pressure is built to understand that our resources, our non-renewable resources cannot last forever. We pollute the atmosphere and with the GHGs, and then we run out of this fuel. So how would the future world function? How would the future generations function in a polluted and in a depleted environment? So these are questions that science fiction forces us to try to answer, and thus people have been impacted and have become climate activists. So after this Rachel Carson's book came into public view and became a kind of Bible for environmentalists, the books that followed after that, they talked about the acute problems rising from climate change, and the result was that many people took up activism, and the earth came into center of consideration, and there were government policies, and there was action by on an international level. There were agreements to do something about climate change. So as critics and naysayers say that not much is being done, but still there is an impact of all this writing, of all the climate fiction and the science fiction on society and on an awareness on the human place in the earth, and how does the human connect with nature. So in Western countries, people are affected about the food they are eating. They have started understanding that to eat fresh food that is coming directly from the farmer, that is healthier and beneficial for the environment and good for the farmer too, rather than increasing the carbon footprint and importing food from outside, or going to stores and buying food that has been preserved or which has traveled by truck thousands of kilometers, where it runs out of its energy and its nutrition, and in addition the miles that the trucks and the aeroplanes have covered, they increase the carbon footprint. So more and more ideas and more books are coming in that are talking about these local markets in the Western world, where people buy directly food directly from the farmers, fruit crops, vegetables and fruits, they are bought directly from the farmers. And there is an incentive to go more for native wisdom. More and more emphasis is being laid on considering native wisdom, on how to deal with pests, how to grow crops, how to tackle climate issues. So all these things are also entering science fiction, and with all this knowledge, the novels have very carefully built climate futures, where the idea of ancient wisdom is also spoken about, ancient mythology is also spoken about. So there are numerous books today online and in markets today which deal with climate change, or which are climate fiction books. And suddenly now an altered future or um, climate events, extreme climate events and disasters, they are not ruled out from these books because they have become the current threat. Future directions in science fiction and climate futures. So, what is the future direction for resolutions to climate impact? There are biotechnological solutions. Some future science fiction works explore biotechnology as a response to climate change, imagining engineering, genetic engineering, biohacking, and synthetic biology as ways to create sustainable futures. So, a whole lot of new areas of studies have developed, and they are all influencing science fiction works. And it's not just the world of uh, pure science, but there are combinations of science and computer technology, science and legal studies. So there are these combinations, synthetic biology or biohacking or genetic engineering. All these things are coming up, which are the possible directions that science fiction is going towards, to create sustainable worlds, to create sustainable systems. Post climate change societies. So these are post climate change societies in which human beings have learned to adapt to new ecosystems. It's human beings are living in altered climates, or they are living in places where the political systems have also changed. So all these are post climate change societies. So in this way we can say that science fiction is a very important genre, and it started the idea of uh, altered climate affected universes to begin with, and it was taken further and in great detail by climate fiction as the post industrialized societies began to sort of groan under the burdens of industrialization, labor problems, food shortages, industrial wastes, and pollutions. So the novels were also affected by it, and gradually we can see the movement towards focus on climate, because in the recent century there have been countless extreme climate events, and though the technology is improving day by day to try to monitor these events, to know beforehand where there will be hurricanes or where there will be earthquakes, yet the fury with which they come is very frightening. So we see it in the news every day, the flooding and the storms in some part of the world. Every second day we hear about that. So that is quite frightening, and to begin to do something about is to look close at our environment, to see ourselves as part of that environment. When we poison and destroy that environment, we must see and we must know that we are harming ourselves. This is what fiction, what climate fiction and science fiction is saying, that you are ruining your future. You are not ruining somebody else's future, you're ruining your own future, and your future generations are likely to suffer if you do not take action. So I'll stop here for now. We'll continue next time. I hope you learned something about how climate change and science fiction have come together, and we talked about several books. So hope you can see some of these movies and read the books. Thank you. We'll meet again in the next lesson.